We are ready to start. Good morning, everyone. The people here in Messina attending in person the conference and the online participant. It's my pleasure to start with this second day of the conference on liberalism and ecology in the Anthropocene. This is a conference is happening from June 30 to July 2nd at University of Messina, Department of Law. We had our first day yesterday, and now we are continuing with this second day. I would immediately pass the floor to the colleague who is a chair for this panel, which is Dr. Kuppuswamy from Hertfordshire Law School in United Kingdom. And I thank everyone for being here and the speakers that will be introduced by Dr. Kuppuswamy. Thank you.
Morning, everyone who's online, and morning, everyone for us offline. Okay, so you can hear me now, loud and clear. Hope you had a good evening yesterday. The dinner was amazing, especially being outside, so it was absolutely lovely. So this is the morning after the night before, so to speak. We had an absolutely brilliant day yesterday. All of us enjoyed it, and we are really ready for today and fresh and in the morning. So we can concentrate today, I think, on two speakers. So excellent time for asking questions and interaction as well. So we've got two lovely speakers today. To start us off will be Louise Ashley from Leeds Beckett University. And she's going to be talking about rights of nature, multipliers or reducers of environmental duties. I'm really sorry about that. So the program lays it out in a slightly different way. The topic is not rights of nature, but actually probably something as part of it, or yeah, it does go with it. So it's a joint paper that Louise Ashley has written with Diana Maria Rodriguez Herrera, and the title is Seed Saving and Seed Sharing, Countermapping a Liminal Legal Space to Support the Rights of Future. She was talking to me about the exciting project that they are doing with researchers in Colombia. So I think this is part of that project. So we look forward to hearing about the project and the work that they've actually done with the project. And the second speaker is Claudia Azzeni, the University Magna Gracia of Catanzaro in Italy. And she's going to be talking about liberalism, ecology, and the process of European integration. We'll know a little bit more about that when she comes on to it. So thank you very much to the speakers this morning. I'll pass it on now to Louise.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Good morning. I'm Louisa Ashley from Leeds Beckett University, and this is a co-authored paper with Diana Maria Rodriguez Herrera at the University Technology de Correa in Colombia. Unfortunately, Diana can't be here. Oh, I'm too close. Thank you. Come. Yeah, sure. Okay, can't be with us today, but Diana should be online, although we are slightly earlier than planned. So I've just got my phone here to see if she is online watching, but hopefully she is. So, all right, Diana. Before I begin, just to say thank you to the conference organisers. It's an absolute pleasure to be here in Messina with everybody and getting to find out all about everybody else's work as well. So I'm going to be talking today about the embryonic stages of a project that has emerged. I first linked with academics in Colombia in 2018 when I was at a week-long series of workshops, and they were focusing on restoring and maintaining natural and social capital through social innovation in Latin America. And since then, courtesy of some Erasmus Plus and GCRF funding, I've since been working with Diana, and she is currently working on a separate project documenting case studies as part of a postdoctoral research project program titled Transformation and Associative Initiatives in Andean Communities. And it's among that work that several environmental justice concerns have emerged, excuse me, some of them linked to the implementation of seed laws. So the project between myself and Diana in its first stage sought to identify relevant laws and any relevant cases in which restrictive seed laws within Colombia around the use of certified seed had been enforced, and the translation of some judgments into English. And this has then progressed to some initial field work, speaking to small-scale farmers and seed producers in Colombia, and also the UK about their practice to potentially develop a comparative approach. The seeds hold data about the past that is fundamental to the present, vital to our future, and are caught up in a political and legal maelstrom. The policies of place centred on seed is an apt methodological situation in which to observe the limits of capitalism, which take the form of the social problematic due to the problem of equity, the environmental problematic due to the recent trajectory towards genetic uniformity and reliance upon high input, high mechanisation, long and complex supply chains, the cultural problematic due to homogenisation, and the legal problematic due to the restrictive global governance of seed and the ensuing liminal legal space that we suggest is occupied by certain seed savers and seed sharers. From what has been discussed over the conference yesterday, particularly with regard to the unsustainability of sustainable development and observations that Diana and I have made about international seed laws, it would seem that the current global governance legal framework of seeds and related matters is in crisis. We caution that whilst situating environmental problems as ontological problems of being, that it has a conceptual and methodological gaps from an anthropological perspective, similar to those of the concept of culture. Building empirical evidence is key to avoid romanticising indigenous or Andean ontologies and epistemologies, where Buen Vivir tends towards the ideological. So the value of seeds has never been in any doubt, but an appreciation of the importance of genetic diversity and the risks associated with a monocultural and genetically stable approach to farming seed, coupled with an understanding of the fundamental need for biodiversity in the soil and a focus on plant neurobiology, it seems is only recently being re-understood or rediscovered. Diversity runs counter to the market forces aligned to the Green Revolution and the dominant legal framework. The advent of agricultural modernisation saw high-yield commercial seeds being improved and standardised. The commercialisation of seed at scale and its control has led to an unprecedented loss of genetic agrodiversity and resilience in farming practice across the world. Reliance on high input methods degrades soil quality, complicates and lengthens supply chains, creates a situation in which farmers are indebted, undermines food sovereignty and creates food insecurity. The genetic knowledge of seeds accumulated over thousands of years has been commercially concentrated in a few specialised high-tech companies, which began to differentiate seeds and claim intellectual property rights over genetically improved cultivars, especially transgenic GM ones. Instead of in situ diversity within the field and crop resilience, diversity is more commonly the domain of ex situ preservation in seed banks. In this contemporary context, seeds have begun to be classified institutionally according to the intellectual property they contain, forming a continuum that goes from transgenic GM to native, passing through Creole, peasant, patrimonial, cultural, heritage as a range of adjectives. Adjectives that have been emerging from small-scale farmers and activists to name the historical genetic agrodiversity that risks being erased or situated in a liminal legal space. And these are just photographs of one of the particular case studies that I will go on to talk about. And the picture in the top middle is of a seed house called La Casa de las Semillas in Colombia. This has led us to the present day, where from India to South America, farmers have taken, as it were, their pitchforks from the field to the street to protest against restrictive laws that criminalise practices they have been engaged in for thousands of years. We've made some observations, and we propose that through daily seed management and seed sharing practices, farmers and their seed occupy a liminal legal space as resistance to the invasion of agribusiness. Although the current global seed regulation regime seeks to reduce the risk in the harvest forecasts of large producers, it introduces legal uncertainty about ancient, cultural and climate-friendly agricultural practices of free handling of seed, which is currently usually the domain of small-scale farming and organic farming. It also supports an industrial agrotechnology approach to farming with serious adverse consequences, as stated, for the health of the soil, via reliance upon high inputs, expensive machinery dependent upon fossil fuels, and a system in which farmers become in debt to large-scale multinational seed companies. We suggest that the local spaces of management of seeds and a diverse polycultural approach to farming, described variously as agroecological, nature-friendly farming and regenerative farming, emerge as countermaps of resistance to the global governance of regime of seed as encapsulated by UPOV, which is the International Union for the Protection of Plant Varieties, and related national legislation. So the concept of liminality and the liminal space is commonly associated with the field of anthropology. It situates people and practices in in-between spaces. They defy categorization based on fixed approaches by eluding or slipping through the network of classifications that normally locate states and positions in cultural space, meaning that liminal entities are neither here nor there. They are betwixt and between the positions assigned and arrayed by law, custom, convention, and ceremonial. So that's a quoting there from Turner, as cited by Laurie in 2017. I've got some references at the end. So legal scholarship has applied the idea of liminality to uncertainty, primarily in the context of an individual's undocumented or documented migrant immigration status, and with regard to the regulation and law of human health research. I haven't yet come across its use in the field of seed saving and seed sharing. I have come across the concept of the legal fuzziness of seed. And this is a term used by Diego Silva Garzan and Laura Gutierrez Escobar, whereby legal fuzziness takes place at the level of legal implementation. And during some of their own field work, they note that farmers refer to non-certified cotton seeds as fuzzy seeds because they are covered by a natural fuzz that comes from a layer of lint that is removed from commercial seed. But out in the field, Gutierrez found blue-coloured fuzzy seeds, indicating that farmers were colouring their conventional seed to foil inspectors. To observe how this liminal legal space is occupied and these countermaps are built, we present briefly the case of two contrasting approaches that have emerged in the last decade or so, one located in Colombia and the other in the UK. In both places, farmers respond to the problem of genetic erosion derived from agricultural modernisation, framed in the context of neoliberalism. In Colombia, agricultural modernisation was introduced from the 70s, and since 2007, legislation allows for the use of GM crops. Currently, in Colombia, agricultural subsidies are low, and organic farming is not easily accessible to small-scale farmers, but it is in practice. Similarly, the situation in the UK, however, GM crops are not grown commercially, although they are consumed via animal feed, and there's been the recent government consultation on the use of gene editing, with legislation on the horizon. Our particular focus in Colombia is on one of the nodes of the Free Seed Network of Colombia, or the Red de Semillas Libres de Colombia, that works in the Cañumomo and Lomprieta indigenous resguarda. This network arose in response to the entry of transgenic seeds into Colombia under the support and advice of the NGO Swiss Aid, and a group of indigenous farmers concerned about the contamination of their corn varieties by GM crops made use of their constitutional rights to promote the legal recognition of their resguarda as a GMO territory. From this milestone, this group of farmers have continued to promote, on the one hand, the practice of agroecology within their resguarda, which is otherwise highly influenced by agricultural modernisation. On the other hand, they have specialised in the production, storage, exchange and distribution of native and Creole seeds of interest for organic and agroecological farming. Currently, they are working on the formation of a school of farmers specialised in seeds who can continue reproducing the knowledge of their seeds that they have been recovering and making visible for more than a decade. However, in order to circumvent the restrictions that only seed that is certified can be commercially sold, which is very expensive and is a problematical issue for them because their seed is genetically diverse, which I'll come on to shortly, they have devised an approach shown here on these seed packets. So on the picture on the left, I think it's your left as well, yeah. On the picture on the left, what you can see is some words that state, this seed is not a commercial product. The cost is what the custodian is recognised for his effort and dedication to produce it. And then on the reverse of the seed packet, it states that La Casa de las Semillas, so the House of Seeds, is a meeting place for custodians of native and Creole seeds who recover, conserve, produce and exchange agroecological seeds. They are the heritage of the peoples to strengthen the culture and good living of indigenous communities. So the key point here being that when someone acquires a packet of these seeds in exchange for some money, it is not the seeds that they buy, but the custodianship that they contribute to. In the UK, rather than a group or network of farmers, we speak of a pioneering individual, John. John's got an interesting story. It was whilst he was working at Oxford University's Museum of Natural History that he acquired a box containing straw that had come from the thatched roof of a medieval house. And he saw around 20 different kinds of wheat, much longer than the commonly grown wheat of today, and with each ear being different. And this marked the start of his journey to seed banks and farmers all across the world to try and recover and rebuild what he refers to as heritage wheat into a hardy landrace. And he's been driven by his knowledge, which he in his words, he says, the obsession with selection, purity, yield, high input production has led to the collapse of traditional farming and farming communities everywhere. But for John, like the people of La Casa de las Semillas, selling his seed commercially is not an option. And this is because it fails to meet the legal, distinct, uniform and stable criteria of UCOV and related national legislation. So his way around this is via what he calls a seed user agreement. And this is to allow other farmers to use and grow his seed under his careful guidance. He remains the owner, so he retains ownership and thus avoids the legal transfer of ownership problem. So this is where we propose there is a precarious positioning in terms of the liminal legal space that La Casa de las Semillas and the farmer in the UK are occupying in order to share their seed that they argue is far more resilient and climate friendly and needs to be preserved with a perspective of custodianship for future generations. And you can see on this picture, we have John stood in his field, and this is actually taken last week when I was doing some research with John there, and you can see where he's holding the two bunches of wheat, that the much longer variety is the heritage grain variety that he has developed, which has much longer roots as well. So it's nutritionally more I've lost my words now. And it's more nutritional. Its nutritional value is much higher because it's going deeper into the soil and drawing from the minerals. And John's grain, this in the picture in the middle is a whiskey that his grain goes into, and this is produced by an artisan distillery in Oxford, and that prides itself on being one of the very few grain to glass distilleries out of hundreds of distilleries in the UK. And so here you have a shortening of the supply chain and a concentration in one place of the manufacturing process, the distillation process. And this distillery has a principle of only sourcing grain from within a 50-mile radius of its location. Okay, and John also experiments with genetic diversity in his maize or his corn crop, and this looks very similar to the genetic diversity of maize that is grown within Latin America. In the age of the Anthropocene, liberalism has prospered as a means of pursuing and protecting individual liberties and freedoms, be they economic, social, cultural, from state and institutional interference. However, principles of liberalism have supported the emergence, as we know, of a neoliberal paradigm contributing to environmental risk and degradation. Too often, we see development policies and practice involving extractive industries and agribusiness presiding over the use and value attributed to land and ecosystems. In tandem, the Green Revolution and food security rhetoric has supported the advancement of transnational corporations, has seen ever greater investment in and reliance upon high input farming and homogenization via certified and GM organisms. And in this context, an exclusionary legal regime complex has developed to prioritize individual property rights over global commons, peasant rights, and indigenous ways of being. The result is an anthropocentric mapping and valuation of land based on monocrop yield, upsetting environmental dynamic equilibrium and ecosystem resilience. Soil is increasingly exhausted and degraded, its natural life source of diverse flora and fauna and pest control depleted, and previously biodiverse landscapes are rendered monocultural wastelands. And I should just say that the grain that John grows is a no input process, so there is no use of any pesticides, fertilizers. Further, at an international governance level, it would appear that we are presented with two systems that conflict. Incompatibility between UPOV and the International Treaty for Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture when it comes to the right to save, use, exchange and sell farm-saved seed and other propagating material, with UPOV being said to be more strictly implemented than the ITPG-RFA. Not an easy acronym. So I won't go through the legislation in detail because I'm conscious of time, but that slide just summarises some of the key aspects there regarding UPOV, and in particular Articles 6, 7, 8 and 9 requiring novelty, distinctness, uniformity and stability in order for seed to then be registered under the relevant domestic legislation. And here we have the Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources, and just a very quick highlight of the relevant articles there. This almost final slide just captures some potential additional fields of study. As I said at the start, this is the start of a journey, And it strikes me that there is more to look at in terms of post-development discourse, post-human legalities, which would align with the rights of nature, and considering whether in terms of biocultural rights, whether there is the potential to ascribe to a seed or set of seeds biocultural rights. In a similar way, yesterday there was the reference to there was a decision in the Constitutional Court of Colombia giving rights to the Ojoro River, and whether something similar could happen with regards to particular heritage or native or Creole seeds. These are just some of our questions that are still emerging as part of this project. And again, the photograph is one that I took last week, and it's just lovely to see poppies growing in amongst the wheat. The field is diverse. There is an undercover of clover. I don't claim to be, I'm no expert when it comes to farming, but this is just knowledge that's been shared with me, and it's lovely to have the chance to share it with you today. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Louisa. Your talk reminded me of a statement by Vandana Shiva in India, who says seed saving is a political act, and it just couldn't be any more truer. Really looking forward to how your questions develop and how your research develops, especially this idea of the liminal space and your analysis of the seed user agreement in the UK. That looks like John's idea of what he wants to protect. So it's like a really interesting contractual arrangement, and how that sits with the regulatory and the governance framework, which, as you have mentioned, is quite vast, starting with the ITBB. I'm not going to, I always have problems with that. I used to study the transition from the common heritage concept and that treaty to the fact that it went into not being common heritage as in the seeds issue. So that's something that is always a repetitive theme, isn't it? In terms of who do the seeds actually belong to? Yeah. And in a way, the fact that the openness that we advocate in actually get in the way of the heritage being saved. And so your concept of the biocultural rights and other things that you're talking about in some way actually does then give due to the custodians, but in a way that's much more communal and much more how they want to recognize it, as opposed to then doing it through either plant breeders' rights or UPOV. So I think it's just a really very interesting. What I found is a lot of studies have been done in, I would use, because there are objections about using global south, I would say certain countries where there's a lot of traditional farming practices. However, I think the fact that you're comparing the UK and Colombia is actually another very interesting trend as well, which might be really, because it looks like the ideas that are put forward by both of the farmers are, you know, quite similar, and they want to do it for reasons that seem to be common as well. That's another unusual comparison. So thank you ever so much for that talk. And now we actually move to something quite different, it seems like, but hopefully with that sort of ethos of, so you're going to be looking at liberalism, ecology, and the process of the European integration. So that's really amazing. And this is Claudia Azzeni from the University Magna Gracia of Catanzaro. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Kuppuswamy. Good morning to everyone. The purpose of my contribution is to analyze to what extent liberalism and ecology are compatible, starting with a brief analysis of some concepts that could be problematic for the theoretical dimension of liberalism, such as the obligation toward future generations. I will then focus on the difficulties of environment protection and climate justice with contemporary liberalism, especially in the practice of one of the most complete forms, the process of European integration. The time we live in can be defined as Anthropocene, Capitalocene, or Arboreocene. Each term emphasizes the impact of human action on the world and its technological development, in particular on the climate and ecosystem. As Ignatieff says, the moral imperative of individuals of this era is to take responsibility for having acted as a master of nature. In a time of severe environmental crisis like the one we are experiencing, it's legitimate to ask whether a change of pattern that can take into account the interdependence between the individual and nature is necessary or not. The ecological self of Arne Næss, the ontology of Nikolai Hartmann, and the imperative of the responsibility of Hans Jonas go in this direction. Even if they start from sometimes different assumptions, they all have in common the theoretical and ethical rethinking of the natural dimension. However, it would be difficult to look for references to nature as an entity with intrinsic value in liberal theories, as well as in the pages of contemporary authors who refer to utilitarianism or contractualism, as Ferdinando Menga states. While considering the different meanings of the term liberalism, philosophical, political, and economic, as well as its development in contemporary era, ordoliberalism and neoliberalism, it will be possible to trace certain recurring elements from an ethical and juridical point of view. Among these, the centrality recognized to the protection of human freedoms, the impositions of limits of sovereign power, and the aspiration to a desirable and efficient economic order. The emphasis placed on this long term, as well as the question of intergenerational differences and sustainability, demand a type of politics that does not find conceptual prisms within liberal theories. The complexity of the environmental crisis will require correction established by long-term planning, as a significant change in the political and economic management of resources. By nature, in fact, this action involves interests and preferences not directly attributable to the citizen of our time, the so-called future generation, nor to living beings, the entire ecosystem. Through the lens of one of the theoretical foundations of liberalism, the right of property, some of the most important liberal philosophers, such as Edmund Burke and John Locke, looked at the earth as common property between generations. Those who have dealt more closely with intergenerational differences in the contemporary era, such as Brian Barry, have tried to see an indirect reciprocity between generations. According to Barry, the current generations are called to hand over a capital at least equivalent to their children, because they have inherited it from their parents. It will therefore create a sort of obligation of the present generation toward the previous one. However, as Axel Gossier pointed out, for a state to justify its sustainable development policies by reason of obligations to the dead is a challenge to the liberal requirement of neutrality on the part of the state toward various metaphysical conceptions and views of the good life. Furthermore, the pursuit of improving the future situation from a liberal perspective must be conducted in compliance with fundamental freedoms and according to the individual needs of nowadays. For example, as Robert Nozick points out, it will be unfair to restrict the exercise of property rights to promote the well-being of future generations, as well as freeing any bans on polluting when individuals who are called upon to implement anti-polluting practices are not willing to bear the negative effects because they are anti-economic. Through the just saving principle, John Rawls looks to the future generation by arguing that one of our duties is to guarantee them sufficient material capital savings. However, the so-called social minimum does not aim at protecting and safeguarding the ecosystem, but rather at leaving to future generations what is necessary for the existence of the good institutions. According to Rawls, the status of natural world and our correct relationship with it are neither essential constitutional elements nor question of fundamental justice. Thus, Rawls' idea broadly leaves environmental protection to individual preferences expressed by the majority. If individuals do not consider themselves responsible for a duty towards future generations, their protection will be excluded from a public policy action. Two issues emerge from this brief review. If we aspire to the construction of an ethics of responsibility, a radical shift of point of view towards future generation is necessary. Therefore, the one who acts must adopt future generations as their creditor. As Barry states, we must give back to our children a capital at least equivalent to what we receive, but not because we receive it from those who preceded us, but because we borrowed it from those who will come after. Secondly, it's necessary to understand how much the protection of freedoms can be combined with a democratic political strategy that takes into account both the danger of the climate crisis and its anthropogenic nature. So, what freedoms is contemporary liberalism talking about? Are they compatible with the philosophy of ecological nature? In order to answer, I refer to the process of European integration, which represented the main attempt at liberal harmonization between the individual European systems. This process pursued the ideal of a cooperating community for a free and united Europe. We can recall the Ventotene Manifesto. At the same time, this project required a necessary link between supranational and internal structures. In fact, from the second post-war period, the union between the European communities was achieved in positive terms by imposing a set of actions inspired by democratic principles on Western systems, for example, through treaties, charters, and conventions which established the recognition of human rights in various forms. However, this peculiar union between states was achieved under the political, legal, and economic profile as a negative integration, as Gian Domenico Maglione says, therefore conceived above all for the market freedoms and aimed their homogenization. It is therefore a functional union in the sense that the efforts of the European institutions have been mainly channeled towards the economic sphere. And it is precisely for this reason that in recent years there has been a lot of discussion about neoliberal or ordoliberal Europe. According to Jürgen Habermas, this unique shared sovereignty was not achieved through the ethical, moral constitutionalization of its inspiring principles, but through the constitutionalization of the system of economic freedoms. From the creation of the European Coal and Steel Community in 1951, up to the signing of the treaties of Rome in 1957, the achievement of the Customs Union and the Common Market, and arriving at Economic and Monetary Union in 1992, the four fundamental economic freedoms were recognized as the main means for achieving European integration. In this way, it was possible to achieve the ever closer union among the peoples of Europe announced by the preamble of the EEC Treaty. In the last decade, the constitutionalization of economic freedoms has been considerably accentuated due to the crises that have hit the European Union. This crisis has accelerated the consolidation of a series of economic measures born as emergency, but have also caused a large portion of collective life and political legislative choices in the economic sphere to be significantly removed from the validation of democratic institutions. Let's consider, for example, the fiscal compact and its golden rule, with respect to which there was talk of European democratic deficit and of tension between liberal economic ideals and the principle of popular sovereignty. Now, although it's possible to believe that there are the objective differences between the theoretical programs of contemporary liberalism, starting from the geographical location of the Austrian school, the Fribourg school, the Chicago school, there is a convergence in recognizing a Weltanschauung, a worldview among contemporary forms of liberalism, the order liberalism and neoliberalism. There is, in fact, a certain order and a certain government action, both determined to constitute the presuppositions of a competitive model outlined by an economic constitution capable of containing the role of economic power and pluralism on the interests expressed in contemporary societies. In this sense, contemporary liberalism, regardless of its labels, would present itself as the political theoretical foundation of an economic order with a market that cannot exist without the state. The institutional framework thus becomes an essential tool of the free economy, capable of ensuring a market policy based on economic freedoms and competition, as Warren Buffett states. The European management of the ecological crisis seemed to respond perfectly to these needs. In 1919, the European Commission illustrated the Green Deal protection, a strategy that aimed to address the environmental issue through a series of actions. Along with this, the EU Regulation 241/2021, establishing the Recovery and Resilience Device, was made in response to COVID-19 pandemic crisis with main focus on the environment. However, the main objective was to equip the European Union with a modern, competitive, and resource-efficient economy. One of the main tools to reduce gas emissions was certainly in the scheme issued by the EC Directive 87 of 2003. A system for the exchange of greenhouse gas emission permit flanked by the cap and trade mechanism centered on the emission allowances assigned to every company. Each limit gives the right to emit 1 ton of carbon dioxide. Within the cap, companies receive or buy emissions allowances which they can trade with another as needed. The system does not act directly on the imposition of a ban on polluting companies, such as multinational companies, but allows them to implement a real market. And this model seems to actualize and concretize Nozig's theory of selling transferable pollution rights for specified quantities. However, the European Green Deal does not require systematic priority to be given to environmental protection, but determines the obligation to balance the various interests. An assessment of the need related to environmental protection and the reconciliation of the same with economic interests that characterize the policies and action of the Union. Indeed, the Recovery and the Resilience Device provides for financial aid for adoption of measures to protect the environment, establishing that only measures that comply with the do not significant harm principle can be financed. The actions outlined in national RRPs may not cause any significant harm to the environment. The threshold, however, is not specified. I therefore conclude by saying that the transition to a sustainable system appears as an opportunity to increase the profitability of companies, rather than a real acquisition of awareness of environmental crisis. Globalization is rewriting balance between market and politics, creating a clear imbalance toward the former. And as Luigi Ferraioli repeatedly pointed out, most recently in Toward the Constitution of the Earth, it is intensifying the enhancement of nature as a productive element rather than meeting it. In the Anthropocene epoch, nature loses its intrinsic, transcendent, and ontological value to acquire its individual force, responding to the principle of the existence of the Homo economicus. As Alessio Giudice points out, climate justice aims to protect the most vulnerable subjects as they lack adequate resources to deal with the environmental and socioeconomic effects of climate change. Instead, the privatization of common goods, the exploitation of resources for economic growth, and the financial exchange system of pollutants capacity move in a completely different direction. This type of action forces us to reformulate the concept of responsibility, legitimacy, and justice in the light of a contemporary social context that generates profound questions about our development model. Therefore, the liberal regulatory ideal aimed at the prohibition of excessive interference by institutions with respect to everyone's freedom and rights seems to be hardly compatible with the need for collective international and intergenerational action imposed today by the management of the climate crisis. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Claudia. That was really interesting. It affirmed and I think carried on some of the ideas from yesterday as well in terms of liberalism and its impact. So in your first half, I think you really laid it out very neatly and brought us into liberalism again this morning to think about it. And in the second half, it's really interesting. You touched on European integration, such a big topic. You touched on many things. The thing that caught my eye is your reference to the cap and trade system, the ETS system of the first ever market-oriented system for companies to manage their emissions. But like you mentioned, it also gives them a way of offsetting carbon. Yeah. So it kind of shifts it outside the borders as well. So now you start seeing the cracks in the project of applying liberalism to the reduction of emissions so we can deal with the global warming problem. But quite scarily, ETS is now being replicated at the world level, and we are having now standards for the cap and trade system around the world, which is again following the same trends of market-oriented approaches. But the emissions trading system in Europe, which has been functioning for quite a while now, has already shown huge issues, isn't it? In terms of how do you properly measure? Is there a proper, double counting of emissions take place and all of that? And also its impact on land use in other countries, because the company tries to buy carbon credits in Mexico or in India. Yes. By getting a forest to grow over there. But what happens to the agricultural land that's taken over? So serious.
But the labor being followed this model, this scam. Yes.
Exactly. So that so I suppose that's something you wanted to allude to, but your paper really kind of captured the essence of some of the problems that's faced within the whole idea of European integration, which is an amazing project in every sense because it brings peoples together and it's an exemplar for an international organization, but here we find the cracks. So thank you ever so much for that. I think now we are going to be opening the floor to questions. After two speakers, we're going to take questions from our current audience here in the room, and then Paula will inform me if there are questions online. So please, let's do the musical chair of coming here and taking my seat if you want to ask questions, but please don't be put off before that. So seed saving and European integration and liberalism. You first.
Thanks. Hello, everyone online again as well, back on the seat. I actually have a question that hopefully you both can address, even though it's different topics, and I thought it was really interesting, and particularly seeds related as well to peasants' rights. I think is a very interesting development. What I heard in both your presentations was also a lot of the problems with multinational corporations and agribusiness. And I was wondering, and this might be a very abstract and maybe a more practical question, but what do you see as the limits and maybe also the possibility through each of your subjects, so the way that you approach European integration and through, for example, agroecology specifically, for increased accountability, possibly, I know this is a very difficult question always, of corporations. Thanks.
Thank you very much for both presentation. I have a thought inspired by Claudia's presentation. I really appreciate your your view on the relationship between liberalism with the different approaches and the process of European integration. And I also really appreciate your critical attitude to this relationship. I think that you are right when you stress the ordoliberal point, the ordoliberal matrix, because even if it's quite present in the debate on the European process of integration, the relevance that is attributed to this source, it's not so widespread in the debate. Because as you mentioned, there is a big difference between liberal and neoliberal approach and the specific approach of the ordoliberalism that actually, if we, as you know, as you mentioned, if we see to the documents starting from the Schuman Declaration and so on, it's really clear that the source, the cultural source, from an economical theory of the process of European integration was the ordoliberalism. In particular, all the accounts that you can derive from the Fribourg school. I mean, the main theorists of this school were taken as a point of references. It's very important, this point, for our discussion. So it's very brilliant, your idea to work with that, because according to the ordoliberalism, the state should guarantee the framework, as you said, the framework of the competition. And so the state should intervene. And this is the difference with the neoliberal account. But the interference, the intervention, should just limit it to create the condition of competition. It's not possible for the state, theoretically speaking, to intervene in order to guarantee justice, or to guarantee social rights and social justice. Or the problem that is very linked with your point and with our discussion is that until, I could say, I mean, it's hard to give a date, but until the 80s, the end of the 80s, I think until the Maastricht treaties, to a certain extent, this ordoliberal source that is not able to guarantee social justice was compensated by the existence in the European states, in the most of the European states, of an efficient, of course with differences, welfare state. And so with an internal system able to guarantee social justice. What happened? What is happening and is always in force, above all after the Maastricht Treaty, is the difficulties for each European state. Of course, there are some differences like the Scandinavian countries, to guarantee an efficient welfare state. And so we are dealing with a European process, a European framework, a European experiences that is based on the ordoliberal account without the compensation of the welfare state at national level. I don't know, this is just a way to intercept your line that in my view is really convincing. I would like to know, this is it's not a question in a strict sense, but a curiosity about your thought. What do you think about the last political account of European commissions and so on? Because by virtue, because of the pandemic, there was an inversion in some political measures, because the political measures and economical measures that were adopted after the pandemic, while there was for the emergency, of the pandemic emergency, they were for sure far from the ordoliberal account. They were for the first time really linked to I mean, sui generis anyway, idea of welfare state, because it was a social, economical investment in order to guarantee social rights. but without a framework. Because as all the scholars of the European law know, there is not until now a real devolution of competencies on social matters in a strict sense to the European level. It's one of the last sovereign prerogative that is still attributed to the state. But the paradox is that several states, most of the states, are not able to use this prerogative because they don't have the material resource to guarantee a welfare state. As Zygmunt Bauman said in a beautiful book on Europe, it's not anymore possible a welfare state in a single state. You need the welfare state in a regional space. You need to work to an idea of welfare state at a European level, a European welfare state. So I would like to know what you think about this sort of attempt, in my view, to change the line, and what do you think about the necessity, in a more systematic way, to deal with the idea of a European social space, European welfare state, for our discussion on future generation, on the ecological crisis.
Anyone else?
Thank you very much for your presentations. Congratulations. And to balance the amount of questions, my question is for Luisa. There is a debate whether seeds should be considered as a food or as non-food products. And the answer to this question influences the international legal regime of seeds. And there is a debate in the WTO as well, how should seeds be considered? And there is a case law when seeds were considered as a food because they were accidentally eaten by birds. So therefore, the question is, from the perspective of seeds producers and seeds consumers, what approach would be preferable, to consider them as a food or as non-food product? Thank you very much.
Excellent. So just on the order of speakers, I'm going to give it first to Louise to answer questions. That's all right? Excellent.
Thank you. So thank you for the first question, where, if I've captured it correctly, the question was, what do you see as the limits, possibilities for increased accountability of corporations? And in terms of, I've got a habit of doing that, sorry. In terms of, it started me thinking around benefit sharing and traditional knowledge, and obviously the sort of concerns with regards to how that operates and functions. There's been some recent scholarship proposing that a human rights-based approach to benefit sharing might be more effective. There's also corporate social responsibility, which has been around for some time, and whether that's more successful as a PR and marketing tool than actually amounting to a means for accountability. I think, interestingly, litigation against the state, and this time this was a Supreme Court case in Colombia, which involved some a class action of some young people that were holding the state accountable for their concerns around their future because of inaction on the state's part to protect the Amazonian rainforest. And that then leads to a governance process and the putting in place of a governance framework that again depends upon human action to protect something that is then afforded rights of nature. So the success of the rights of nature approach is paradoxically dependent upon human oversight and the balancing of the different interest groups of those that are seen to be the beneficiaries and the key actors in that governance process. So that again is another imperfect way of dealing with it. I think as well, in terms of accountability of corporations, it is intrinsically linked with the role of the state. And if we look at the Environment Agency in the UK and its failure to use its enforcement powers against those parties that are in breach of environmental laws when they are polluting. And this comes back to the Environment Agency being an arm of the state and its serious underfunding. For example, I think last year there was a report that there is no river in the UK that is deemed safe to swim in, but people still swim in them. I think an area that we might consider more is the theory of value and consumer preference and consumer choice, because the multinational corporations are very much dependent upon their consumers, and there is a lot more power there than is currently being harnessed. But then that is also linked to costs of purchase, and coming back to the theory of value, that the chicken that someone might buy for £3.50 has cost the earth a heck of a lot more than £3.50. So maybe this comes back to some of the systems theory thinking that was touched upon yesterday as well. These are very complex matters that require complex solutions, and I think free trade agreements as well, and the role of multinationals and states in negotiating those agreements and implementing them. Quite a long-winded answer there. Do you want me to, because I'm conscious that question was for both, but shall I move on to the second question? Yeah. Okay, so the question of whether seed producers would consider that seed should be food or non-food product. The reason I've got my phone in my hand is because I've got Diana here on WhatsApp in case there's anything that she wanted to contribute. So hola, Diana. I didn't say hola earlier. Feel free to message me with any more comments. So Diana has just said that on the question of whether or not seeds are food, remember that a seed is not just a grain, it can also be cuttings, plant parts, etc. And it's not just a food or a non-food product. It's not necessarily a product. It's a living, it's a living complex system in and of itself. And there may be some of you in here that know a lot more about this than I do, but the neurobiology of plant systems, and those plant systems come from the seed in which the system then develops from, is quite phenomenal. And the messages that the roots are sending out to change the chemical composition. I know I'm deviating massively from the question here, but I think it all comes back to it's not a binary matter, and the binary thinking is part of the problem. Okay. Thank you. Yes.
No, go ahead. Yes, interesting.
Thank you for your questions and suggestions. About the first question of Jolie, I think the problem is that there aren't limits to work and capacity, for example, about pollution of the multinational companies imposed by institutions, neither to internal level, at the level of the single state, nor at European or supranational levels. And this is the reason why I was talking about a sort of market which allow to single multinational to sell this part of this section of pollution to other multinationals who doesn't reach their limit, their very basic limits about capacity of polluting. And even if there are many, there is a direction to which is in the idea also of the ecological transition. Actually, there aren't the possibility that, for example, people, there isn't a self-determination about people to improve the various multinational and agencies to reduce the polluting capacity. So I think that we can expect an institutional action, real action to act against this problem, because I don't believe that the single multinational and at all levels will take a real decision to stop to create problems to ecology by itself. About the question of Professor Lo Giudice, well, I think there is a very great problem about Maastricht Treaty, which is the fact that it divides economic politics and monetary politics. The second one is in the hands of the supranational institutions. The former is in the hands of the internal states, single states. But this separation between these kind of powers do not, can't harmonize, can harmonize itself at both level, internal and supranational level. If we, for example, try to find the measures to contrast the crisis, the financial crisis or economical, political crisis of 2010, we can find, if we look the institutional strategy, we can look that there is a very important element of the help in the concept of solidarity between states, which is the word conditionality. The European institutions give helps, but they wait, they accept to come back that help in terms of austerity and so many reforms about work market, about pensioni. Pensioni. Yes, for example, many cut on retirement. And this inevitably reflects itself on the social justice and welfare state. At the same time, the institutional framework of European Union has a problem that I consider congenital, because there is a very imbalance between powers. So if, for example, we look at the Italian Parliament and many single parliament has so many powers to legislate in order to many topics, many aspects of our life. It is not the same about European Parliament, because European Parliament has a very narrow power, and the legislative power is co-exerted with Commission, which has the main power in the European framework. For this reason, I think that what you said about the change of road about sanitary crisis, I think there is that is not exactly in this way, because that term conditionality, we can find it even with the pandemic helps. So we are receiving so many helps with the Next Generation EU and many other projects, but in some way we have to borrow it in some time and in some way. So this is, I guess, it's problem. Sorry for my English, a little bit confused, but.
Come on here. Sorry. Oh, sorry. Introduce yourself to the place.
Yeah, hello. I'm just a student. I'm not a teacher or an academic whatsoever. I hope I won't falter, but if I do, please excuse me, as I'm not used to talking in front of a room of academics.
Your English is beautiful, so you have a problem.
Yeah, I learned by speaking with German people online, so that's how I started. Okay, I just want to give a small hint, especially related to the issue with the seed and liminal spaces. And that is starting from a perspective on the South Italian culture, and specifically from the deep South, so Sicilian and Calabrian culture, which is something I have seen you have not talked about, so I thought, why not? Okay, the way we perceive, is it better? Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't want it to be.
No,
it's okay.
Very fine.
Usually when we talk about UK and the American way that land is perceived as something you own, your property. But in our culture, in South Italian culture, we are more the property of the land than the land it is to us. And that is also why we are called a derogatory term in our own country, which is terroni, which means belonging to the land. I think that this perception, this difference in perception, also helps the way we treat land and the way we perceive it. Because, for instance, in our place, enclosures like we see in England or in America are very uncommon, and it's very easy to find unkept private land that is not for commercial use. So that is just a hint to think about, and I don't know if it is helpful for your research. So thank you for listening.
Thank you to the speaker. I had a couple of questions, one for Ashley, one for you, but they are very simple questions, maybe not. For Ashley, sorry.
First name.
First name, I'm sorry. I consider Ashley also a first name. So it is a first name in the US. I'm so sorry. Louisa, Ashley, Louisa. So for you, Louisa, I was reading your notes and your PowerPoint and listening to your presentation. I'm curious. I'm more interested with a question of methodology. Between you and Diana, which type of methodology you used, I guess certainly from social science and humanities, to collect the data and the information, which methodology you used for the interview you did to local people, because this is the type of research that legal scholars are not used to do, but are actually extremely important in the social legal studies, in the science, technology, and society I was mentioning yesterday. So I'm curious really that if you can enter into a little bit into details how you were selecting the people you were reaching out, which type of framework of the interview, if it was a focus groups, if it was an individual one-to-one, if it was how you were managing the interviews to try to bring out their points of view, how you were formulating the questions, if there was a questionnaire or you were going more on a direct basis on the people trying to recover the information and their points of view directly. I'm very interested in hearing that, if it's possible. And then for Claudia, I believe that sometimes there is a risk when we are doing conferences like this to focus on a specific perspective. And I appreciate very much your paper, but I would like to understand whether you have been considering, you did partially in the paper, the perspective of conservative liberalism in a sense that the order liberal that we are discussing, it's something that we are contesting to conservative liberalism sometimes, but sometimes conservative liberalism contest the liberal approach on the issues you are describing. And if we exclude Canada and Europe, and maybe a few other countries, United States and many other countries do not have the social welfare we do have in Europe, right? So is that sustainable? Is that really sustainable, or it isn't? Because I understand that European context has been considered by many as an exception on this vision on more market-related considerations. So I'd like to hear from you which are the scholars you have been trying to examine from the perspective of critiques on Europe, from the perspective of seeing Europe as a social welfare or as a market economy, because if we watch different people, we have different opinions, right? There are certain people that believe that Europe is not doing enough for welfare, for helping people, considering even the COVID-19 pandemic, and others that believe that there are even already now too much help, too many rights in Europe that do not favor enough free market and economy. And so consequently, this creates too much rights and not enough then freedom for companies and the market to operate and producing jobs, because that's really what in the US we see is that in the United States, many people consider that if you attribute too many rights, it's a cost. It's a cost that goes on the future generations. And to try to satisfy current constituency and electorate, you attribute easily rights to the present generations because you needed to get re-elected, but you don't think about the future generation as well. So how do you strike a balance through the theories and through the analysis you're doing on next generation on this type of tension and challenges? I hope it was clear enough. Thank you very much to both of you.
Thank you for that question. And so it's quite interesting working with Diana, because she is very experienced in terms of empirical research and data collection. And this particular focus of this project came out of another project that's a separate project that she's doing a number of interviews on. And in the background, there was documentary analysis in terms of developing a semi-structured approach to the interview. So we did have a questionnaire, but it was an in-person interview, so that allowed for the semi-structured approach. and taking a perspective of grounded theory, but not necessarily following the full sort of methodology of grounded theory, which is quite specific, but more the spirit of grounded theory. So rather than going in with a hypothesis test, very much about finding out and then coding, sort of soft coding as it is, you know, because we're still at the start of this research journey, and also using snowballing to identify our interviewees, from speaking to one person that would then recommend another. And in terms of John in the UK, I was at the Oxford Real Farming Conference that was online, and he was speaking, and you know, he mentioned his seed user agreement. My ears picked up, and I then made contact that way. So very, very much quite an informal approach, always listening, snowballing the recommendations. Just looking, I think that's, yeah. Okay.
Thank you. I hope we will talk about this next times, because the problem, if I consider this a problem of what you were talking about, the American, the kind of liberalism which is now in the United States, is one of the topics I would like to study in the next months. But I think that when in 2008 started the financial crisis in Europe as epiphenomenon of the American crisis of subprimes, and then this crisis transformed it in a political and economic crisis. European scholars were not ready to maybe read, especially the legal theories, was not ready to understand what was happening, because in Europe there is a very great narrative about European integration, European model, and the positive narrative about the road taken by European institutions. But from 2015 started a debate, a multidisciplinary debate from, for example, legal theorists, economists, sociologists, which start to talk about authoritarian liberalism, about the European situation involved by the crisis. And this is a very old concept adopted by Hermann Heller in 1952. So at the end of the Republic of Weimar. I think that this is the first time, if we do not consider, for example, many authors, for example, Wolfgang Streeck, which who already debated about the problem, the European problem, or for example, legal theory, McCormick was one of the first, for many times, the unique author who deal with the problem, hypothetical problems of European Union. So I think that about nowadays, and this difference of American model and European model is not so large, because our, for example, our welfare state, even at supranational level, is not crystallized. because many reforms are going to neoliberal choice. So I think that in the next years we risk to have a very similar economic and political system about welfare state of United States. Thank you.
I just wanted to thank both of you and make also a comment to Luisa. We were working with Chamu and Martin, who is still not arrived due to flights cancellations, on a project on sustainability topics that I think Diana can be very much interested in you yourself doing, because we were missing just Latin America. We didn't cover other areas of the world. So I just wanted to react on that. And I would have many questions as well on other things, but we can discuss offline. And Chiara, thanks for the react. I need to improve my memory on the name. Claudia, to thank you for your responses. Are very much appreciated. Again, I hope personally that Europe will not move in the direction of the United States. Just to clarify my point, but there are these pressures, and we perfectly know that in a country like US. We don't have just two positions. We have the party system, the elections, the electoral system forced to conglomerate and unified to two main parties. And in the past, these perspectives were very much, if we report the American politics to the Italian politics, to the very much the center of the politics in Italy, center right, center left. In the last few years, even before Trump, it has changed a lot in the sense that the politics in the United States has become very fragmented. It is not visible as much as it is visible in the Italian politics or in other countries in Europe because of the party and the electoral system. But in Italy, in other systems, it's very much interesting to see this diversity, which create problems then in ruling the country, right? But in the US side, they are there. Those instances, very much similar to the European side, on the color of the rainbow, really on the color of the rainbow. So I suggest, beside the legal scholar, the political philosophers, and also certain instances that come from US will help you also to interpret certain things are happening in Europe in advance. Even though in the past politics, Italian politics has been bringing in advance what was happening then in other countries. So we can learn a lot by this comparative analysis and understanding. But yes, and what you did going back on many different scholarism in the past is extremely important, because story repeats itself with different results. So yeah, I very much appreciate your response. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paolo. And thank you, Louisa and Claudia, very, very much. We've still got a few more minutes, so if anyone wants to ask any questions, it's still fine. But I just wanted to say, student without a name, please, I don't want to embarrass you by asking your name, but I would have gladly swapped my keynote for yours, because, I wasn't saying anything new yesterday, just machinations of my mind, but you said something really new today. And I think that I would have loved it. So please, that's the value of what you just said. I just wanted to acknowledge that. So thank you very much. And thank you for Alessio pointing that out as well. But please don't, just a student. I think you have all the power. And I have to especially thank Alessio. One of the questions that he gave really enlightened me about the importance of Claudia's first part of the presentation. I knew I was missing something, but then, highlighting the importance of the references to the different schools. I know you didn't have time to give us a lecture on liberalism, but the fact that you were talking about, you know, the old liberalism and the new liberalism and situating her schools within that was really helpful for me to understand, and I'm sure some of my colleagues here in a similar position to me. But then listening to you as well as to her, I still don't think how liberalism can be left off the hook just because it could do better at giving social rights. I think if anything, if we have more social rights, and that is the problem for being, it'll take us into more anthropocentrism. I think so. So, you know, how is it going to help my tigers? How is it going to help my elephants? In a way, it's kind of led to, I think, thinking about the environment near you. And this is something I keep saying. I'll use the UK as an example. To me, UK calls, you know, wildlife and green spaces are important to people. So this is the link between social and environmental rights, I suppose, rather than rights of nature. And what it has ended up doing is to protect local wildlife to the extent that the biggest wildlife that we actually have in our area is a water vole. Now, I was born in a country where wildlife was elephant and tigers. So then you start thinking about what is the European project doing to the globe, to the environment, by securing a better social rights system to Europe. Are you actually spoiling the environment of the whole of the world? I'm putting it in a very, very simplistic way, but there can be a logic that can be made by this very, I know Europe is large and it's the biggest conglomerate of, you know, a serious number of countries, but it's still, you know, excluding about 170 countries. So what we're saying is, I think Europe is a great project if it can work as a world project. Can we do that? But that's not something that we can think about, but that's how we need to think about the European project, I think, in the context of the Anthropocene in particular. So while I really appreciated the analysis and the discussion you took forward, I still think there's huge limitations from moving from a better social rights and welfare state into, can we have welfare for, you know, everything from the other living creatures to be honest, the earth systems, the inanimate. Because at the end of the day, again, I come from a culture which in a short form, everyone recognizes as the yoga culture, in where life actually moves even within the stone. You know, I might now sound a bit fuzzy, but that's the truth. Wherever there is movement, there is life. And that's the understanding we need to have within the Anthropocene. So perhaps the next event that we organize should kind of dig deep into these things. And this kind of really links to what Louisa was saying about the neurobiology of the seed as well. To say, you know, can we actually link movement to life? And if we kind of use that starting point, all of our theoretical frameworks have to start getting fundamentally revised as well. I'm sure there are some physicists who would actually give some good credence to this idea of movement and life. Anyway, I'm transgressing. I've just indulged myself as the chair, but we've actually got another 12 minutes, which is a bonus for having more granita. Or yeah, bonus. But there was one thing I wanted to do was just come back to some of the organizational stuff. Paolo made area part of the European Society of International Law's environmental law interest group. But this conference has also been organized in conjunction with the legal philosophy group. And Özlem,
International Legal Theory and Philosophy.
Yeah, International Legal Theory and Philosophy, the co-convener, Özlem, wasn't able to be with us today. However, she did send us a short statement. It might be a point to kind of read the statement out so we can introduce you to another part of the European Society of International Law. Hungry stomach? No? All right.
Would you like to read it? Would you like I read it?
Do you mind? Or I've been speaking a lot, so if you want to do that, that'd be great, please.
Okay. You are the chairs. You can do that.
I have the prerogative.
So yes, as Chamu was saying, this event was organized with many different partners, as I repeated yesterday at the beginning of the event. There was the involvement, of course, of the University of Messina, West Virginia University, in particular the Interdisciplinary Research Collaborative on Global Challenge and Local Response Initiative, the European Society of International Law, the interest group on international environmental law and international legal theory and philosophy. And from the chair of the interest group, Osman Ulgen from University of Nottingham, she addressed the following message. Dear conference participants, what an exciting program of papers you have lined up. It is fantastic to see such depth and breadth of diverse thinking on liberalism, ecology, and the Anthropocene. Retrospect and prospective thinking about offered by moral and legal philosophy provides a useful tool in this inquiry. Moral and legal philosophy require developing an understanding of the basic components of principle, how and why these principles are formulated as part of an unwritten moral codes of laws, and the continuing rationale of such principles. For instance, the principle of intergenerational equity is central to current debates on the impact of human behavior on the climate and has long-standing roots in developing international environmental law, as well as specialist legal regimes related to common heritage of mankind and aboriginal title land and land-related rights. The principle of intergenerational equity essentially promotes mindful usage and development of natural and cultural resources to ensure these are not passed into future generations in a worse condition than they were received. But why should the future concerns trouble the minds of those with immediate wants and needs, as I was also saying about constituency and electorates and votes? Here there is a tradition of liberal philosophy that offer a rationale for mindful usage and development. And this is where, over the next couple of days, now we are going to be today and tomorrow, you will hear differing perspective on liberalism's role, in particular ecological norms, rights, and duties. So I wish all a very productive and stimulating time in MEC. That was the address from Dr. Ozan Ulgen from University of Nottingham, who is also the chair of the interest group on international legal theory and philosophy. And we felt that maybe on this panel was the right place to address it. So I think so thank you very much to all, and for the online participant, we will have a coffee break. So I suggest you have a coffee as well, or break without coffee if you prefer. Chinese tea or ice cream is also accepted. And so we will see you in about 30 minutes for the next panel. Thank you very much.